Welcome to a Canadian Patriot podcast where I'm here today and I'm very happy to be joined by Graeme MacQueen. Graeme is a distinguished career at McMaster University where he had taught for over 30 years in a field which I found somewhat surprising. And I believe it was the religious studies department and you specialized in Buddhism. Am I correct?
That's correct. Me and
Okay.
Buddhism. That's what the PhD is in.
Okay. And you
I
got that.
taught other stuff too, Matthew, and eventually founded the Center for Peace Studies, where
Okay.
we did a lot of peace and conflict stuff. But you're right.
Okay. And
You,
that,
you,
that,
you're. I'm sorry to keep interrupting you, but
no,
the
no, no.
comment. No, the comment about McMaster made me laugh. I can come back to that and explain why in a minute, but please go ahead.
I would like to hear, yeah, what caused the chuckle. That's definitely so. Yeah, I mean, I guess, and that does dovetail, especially where along the way you found yourself setting up the Center for Peace Studies. I suppose this sort of created an interesting convergence and created a lawful um, foundation for what you found yourself doing in your later part of your career as a distinguished researcher who has done exceptional work publishing and researching in the most rigorous of fashions material that really debunked a certain story, a narrative that has really misshapen the last 20 years of our collective history. And the findings of your work you published in the form of a 2014 book called The Anthrax Deception.
Mhm.
Of course, I'm referring to the anthrax attacks of the year 2001, which went on for several months. It's something which I hadn't really given the proper amount of weight. You know, obviously, people watching this podcast and people who have been thinking on our wavelength are much more inclined to have thought about 9/11, the fallacies in the official narratives of what 9/11 was, what the outcomes were, but the overshadowed, yet I would say equally important uh, process that was unleashed by another inside job, which began in also September of 2001 with the anthrax letters, is something which, again, like I said, did not pay enough attention to. And reading through your works, listening to your lectures has really opened my eyes to appreciate that more. So I'm very thankful to have you here today to showcase some of your findings and your research and your sense of the importance of this to the audience. So thank you, Graeme.
You're welcome, Matthew. It's a great privilege to be here. And despite my laughing every 5 minutes, which, by the way, doesn't come from the fact that these events, 9/11 attacks and anthrax attacks, were funny. They were horrific. And I read over 10,000 pages of firsthand testimony of what it looked like. So I don't laugh at that. I laugh at the stories we're told and that we're supposed to believe. And it just seems to me the architects of these things think that you and I are really, really stupid. And
Mhm.
sometimes laughter is the best response.
Oh,
But anyway, go ahead, Matt.
no, absolutely. And I mean the it's like you wouldn't imagine somebody being able to keep their job as a low quality B movie script writer if they were producing the sorts of scripts that we have been shown and we have been expected to believe are true regarding the story of how two planes could cause three buildings to collapse, or how the evidence was completely incinerated despite the little
Mm.
passports that were found at the base of the towers, and those are in pristine condition. That's
Yeah, they're
aside.
fine.
Yeah.
Hey, yeah, no, absolutely. Well, I finally wrote an article called 9/11, the Pentagon's B movie, and you can find it online. And it explores this in a little more detail. It explores it quite seriously, but you're right, it's also kind of funny. And that was actually my first reaction. At McMaster, we had a teach-in just a few days after 9/11. Just a small number of faculty members gave talks, and then we broke up into groups and so on and so forth. But even at that time, and I certainly hadn't figured out the fraud at that point, but I remember saying to the students, this has this sounds like a B movie,
Mm,
what
mm,
just happened. Now, of course, what I actually thought was that that the story we were told was probably true, probably. but it still sounded like a B movie. And I remember trying to figure out, there are certain older guys that I really respected. Peace researcher Johann Galtung, for example, and of course Noam Chomsky. I knew them both somewhat. Chomsky completely ruled out the alternative narrative of 9/11. He just, no way, that wouldn't have happened. That wouldn't be a fraud. They wouldn't dare, fake that. Whereas Johann said, and I remember he said this at a talk at McMaster, as for the idea that this was not done by Al Qaeda and was an inside job, he said, I would say possible but unlikely. And I thought that's much more rational, and that's the position I stuck with for a few years until I began to seriously look at the evidence. But now, if you don't mind putting something in parentheses here before we get fully underway,
Sure.
there's some guys from the US who decided they wanted to make a documentary film out of my ideas about 9/11. And I said, yeah, if you come pretty quick, because I am sick, but if you come pretty quick, we should be able to do it. So they came. One guy came from New York, one guy came from Los Angeles, and so on. They came to my hometown, Hamilton. And the director said, you taught, I still find this funny. You taught at McMaster University for 30 years. It would make a great place to shoot some of this. We could shoot you in front of a classroom, not necessarily full. It could be an empty classroom, but I just like the ambiance. I said, it's fine by me, but I took early retirement over 20 years ago, so you'll have to set that up yourself. So it looked like everything was going well. And then he got this very stiff little letter saying that unfortunately, it would not be possible to film Professor Graeme MacQueen on the McMaster campus because his views differ from those of, I don't remember how they put it, higher functionaries in the university. and therefore, not only could I not be filmed on campus, but they mustn't use any insignia or symbols or anything that would call to mind McMaster University. I just found the whole thing funny. The director was baffled, but I was just, I guess, mostly amused. But I thought, well, my alma mater just told me where to go. That's for sure. So that shows
No,
how.
absolutely.
Shows how the 9/11 and the anthrax and all that stuff, which I spent so many years of my life studying, turns you into a wild man, a renegade, unwelcome in civilized circles.
Well, it shows you where the electric fence has been placed in the zeitgeist, right? There's certain terrain we're just not allowed to intellectually walk into, and it just has sort of feudal spirit. There are certain places that the serfs knew they weren't allowed to hunt those deer or walk beyond this location of the lord's estate. You just couldn't do it, and now the feudalism has been found in the metaphysical domain of the mind.
Yeah.
See the reactions by McMaster University to something which, I mean, you would think that, sure, all teachers don't agree with the same thing. Like, all teachers, I'm sure, have very divergent opinions on a variety of matters.
Exactly.
But when it comes to topics, if you
exactly. I mean, the very idea that I would show up on campus and claim that I was representing McMaster is absurd. I've never claimed to represent McMaster on anything. And when I was director of Center for Peace Studies, I often was asked to go on television and give my views of this and that, this or that invasion or war. And even then they got annoyed with me at McMaster. I said, why? I am a guy who's being asked to go on TV and give my opinion. I'm not being asked to represent McMaster, and I never have. But I guess they're worried about funders or something. I don't know. Anyway, I think you're right. I like the electric barrier idea that you start to walk onto campus without the proper credentials, and
yeah, right.
You feel it, man.
Well, I think that in some cases there's more toleration if you just have an opinion that is distasteful. But if you can actually, if you've done the work to prove that your opinion is true, then you become a danger. Then your thoughts become more threatening, because you're not just throwing out an op-ed or something. Because you can prove it with facts. You've worked through the evidence. that means you can change minds who are still susceptible to reason, and that
Yeah,
makes you a threat. So I
I
can
think
understand why they would be a little bit paranoid to have you within a 10-mile radius of their of their building.
I think you're right. There was a McMaster faculty. I don't know what they call it, where you all get on, you know, email together. Um, but anyway, we had chats, right? It was a chat room,
Hmm.
and as long as I just gave a mild opinion, it wasn't a big deal. But when I began to offer evidence, boy, one guy said, we've got a term for this. I said, what's that? He said, crackpot realism. And I said, really? But I thought it was called presenting evidence to support a hypothesis. I said, what's your position? He said, your views are on 9/11 are ridiculous. And I said, do you have any evidence to show that? He said, and this was good. This was illuminating for me. He said, I don't need evidence. All I need is good judgment. Now, this was a full professor who taught hundreds and hundreds of students, God forbid,